Welcome to Shut Up and Say Something. I am your host and creator of the show, Deedre Daniel. This podcast is all about how to live a fascinating life, and we're learning how to do that one interesting conversation at a time. We try to stay away from discussing politics, religion, and the ad nauseum topic du jour, but anything else is a fair game. And today I am speaking with Mike Mandel. And Mike runs the world's foremost online hypnosis training academy with over 2,000 students from around the world, including psychiatrists, medical doctors, and professional therapists. And he's also done stage shows for over 40 years. And I don't know Mike. I discovered him because he created a card game that got my attention. And so then I tried to convince him to be on this podcast. And the reason why I wanted to have him on the show today is because if you want to live a more interesting life, you may need to convince others to come along your journey with you or open a few doors for you. And that means you need to have the right language to do it. But after I convinced Mike to be on the podcast, then I found out that he's a master instructor at the Toronto Martial Arts School in a British Army form of jiu-jitsu. And he's a wine connoisseur. He writes for a wine blog, and he has this bombastic and comedic style, which is just fantastic. And he's won all of these awards, and he's been featured in so many magazines. It would probably take this entire episode to list them all. So we're going to get into those topics later, which wasn't even my original intent, but we have to talk about them now. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Lovely to be here, my friend. Lovely to be here.
Oh, I really appreciate you agreeing to be on the show, too. There are casual words that create instant rapport with people. I thought perhaps we could start there with some words. Yeah, just jump in and give us a little micro lesson.
Yeah, the number one mistake people make when failing to build rapport is they talk more than they listen, and they forget to ask questions, because everybody loves talking about their own lives. And well-intended questions, if they're backed up with a genuine interest, draw other people out. I'm going to give you the ultimate rapport secret right off the top here.
Okay.
I'm an NLP trainer. So, for years I was teaching people to match and mirror body language, head tilt, vocal tone, all of these things. And they all work. They definitely work. But one of my teachers, probably the best teacher I ever had, or certainly one of them, was Dr. John Grinder, who was the co-founder of NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And he told me once, he said, the number one rapport secret is this: simply pretend that the person you are speaking to, that you're engaging with, is the most fascinating and important human being you have ever met. Pretend that is true, and then pretend you're not pretending anymore. And your mirror neurons in your brain will do the rest. And I'll tell you, this is so incredibly powerful. Years ago, I was doing a training for Canada Border Services out in Cornwall, Ontario. So I was going east of Toronto a few hours. I took a train out, and after the talk, I had maybe 2.5, 3 hours to wait before I could get the train back again. So I went into the cafeteria, sat in a corner, because I can get really reclusive when I'm working a lot. I just want to be left alone. So I sit in the corner with a book, and this customs officer came in, big, tall guy, sits down opposite me. And as he's sitting down, he says, mind if I join you? Well, what am I going to do? Be a jerk and say, yes, I do mind. Don't you know who I think I am? What do you think? How important I think I am? Anyway, he sat down, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to be able to read. So I decided for the first time in my life, I was actually going to use John Grinder's rapport secret. And I began pretending that this customs officer was the most fascinating, important human being in the world, and then pretended I wasn't pretending anymore. And 2 hours went by in a blink. This guy, his job was to rappel onto Russian trawlers off west coast of Canada and check for all sorts of fishing violations. And he had a fascinating life, a fascinating story. And we talked for close to 2 hours till I had to get to the train station by cab. And he stood up and he said, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I said, no, honestly, bro. I said, thank you. I said, that's one of the most amazing conversations I've ever had in my life. And you know what, Deidre, it really was. Because everybody has something of value to offer. We may be a diamond in the rough, or the other person may be, but if we make that little effort, we can discover the most amazing conversations.
How long have you been married?
41 years.
And do you do this with your wife?
Oh gosh, no, she's way too smart for any of this. I love your concept of fascinating conversations. I can't conceive of taking a long trip without having someone to talk to, or at least listen to something fascinating. Mm-hmm. Although I did the Australia trip and back 5 times. and once with a fractured tailbone, fractured from the day before. I was
Oof.
pretty grumpy. I didn't want to talk to anybody on that trip. But the worst thing for me was when somebody would say, "Oh, so what do you do for a living?" And on a flight, I didn't even want to tell them. I'm a hypnotist. I want to say I'm a librarian or something. As soon as I say I'm a hypnotist, that's the only thing we talked about for the entire trip.
Sure. Yeah. When
it's
I
all right.
worked at Geico, I would tell people that I was a panda breeder and loved my job and I wanted to talk about it, but I knew that I would build rapport faster if I said something ridiculous. And it also allowed me to size them up because if they laughed or if they said, "Oh yeah, I breed duck-billed platypus," or something along those lines, I knew I found a friend. And then of course, if they became over analytical and then asked me a lot of questions like, "Well, why are you here? It doesn't make sense. We wouldn't have panda breeders here. Like, why are you at this conference?" I thought, this is not someone who's going to be my friend, but I might, pull their chain a little bit longer.
Right.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So did you hypnotize your wife to go out on a date with you?
It's funny you should ask that because actually that's how we met. It was April 20th, 1978, April 21st, I believe. She'd correct me. I had, back when I was doing high school and college shows, so I had a show at York Mills Collegiate in Toronto. And my road crew, I had this set built in Las Vegas that turned, this is right in the middle of Star Wars and just starting up. They had the set built that created the bridge of a starship on stage. So I'd hypnotize everyone to all the mentalism. Then the curtains would open for the second half and people would all be in trances on the starship. We'd take them on a trip in outer space with flame projectors and fiber optics and everything. And the road crew was a company called Audience Audio that does not exist now. They did all the sound and lights and we did a 2-hour, 3-hour setup. They had a sister. And they said to their sister and their mom, "You should come and see this weird guy we work for. He hypnotizes people, takes them into outer space." And they said, "Well, if there's a show in Toronto, let us know." Well, there was one at this collegiate, and my wife and her mom both volunteered for the show. And that was how we met. And then we connected a bit later at a party at one of the brothers' houses. And I just fell head over heels in love with this young woman. And that was the start of everything. And I said, we've been married 41 years. I still call her my first wife just to keep her on her toes, though.
Oh, right. I understand. Mm-hmm. Was there any kind of word that you use to convince? Is there a word someone could use in flirting to maybe pull someone in a little bit?
You'd have to ask the pickup artist that stuff. That's not my area of expertise at all.
No?
Although
Okay.
I did a couple of trainings for Neil Strauss, who wrote a lot of books on this. We did one in Hollywood, one in British Columbia, one in Toronto. And he had his Society International, where one of the things they were learning was how to pick up women. But I just think building bridges to people is the key. Seeming interesting. If you're not interesting, at least learn to seem interesting, although it'll fall through pretty quickly, I think, when the rubber meets the road.
Sure. Yeah. Now, I was reading through your blogs and I noticed there's this concept called power language. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Power language, it's also words that change minds. I was a police trainer, so I taught for the Ontario Provincial Police at their behavioral science unit. Ontario Police College, they bring me in just on a one-off thing and did some hand-to-hand stuff for them, but they wanted to know the words that change minds. I got an invite to present at the North American Use of Force Conference. There is such a thing. And one of the things we talked about was the police challenge. Now, North America-wide, back then, when a police officer would confront someone who was in the midst of committing a crime or whatever, they'd draw their firearm, pointed at the person's center body mass, drop into their weaver stance, and they'd say, "Police, don't move." And I said, and in the room, we had cops from Mexico, Eastern Canada, Alaska, everywhere, desk jockeys, every kind of cop. I said, "What do you say?" And they said, "Police, don't move." And I said, "What happens when you say it?" And they said, "He runs away." Like every time. They took for granted. But the reason why is when human beings are under stress, we get an adrenaline dump in our system. When that happens, our critical faculty largely goes offline. And language given to us has to be extremely simple. And we have to tell people what to do instead of what not to do. So when you say police don't move, the brain interprets this by creating a positive out of the negative. We don't process language very well. We process negatives by deletion. So when we say don't move, you have to make an internal representation of what move means to make sense of it and then delete it. That was the problem. You point a firearm at someone, they get an adrenaline dump. You say, "Don't move." Everything in them yells, "Run away, move." And they won't get around to the deletion because their critical faculty is offline.
And they're already in that fight or flight mode.
Already in that fight, flight, or freeze.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's great. It's a great state to be in if you're fighting a saber-toothed tiger or trying to run from one or something, but it's not so great in day-to-day conversation.
Uh-huh.
And when they say don't move, everything in the person is yelling move. And studies have shown you can cover nearly 200 feet horizontally without recognizing you've even taken a single step, without even remembering it. So someone can just suddenly be in the parking lot and not remember running. Although, unfortunately, they're being followed by bullets that are considerably faster than human beings.
Sure.
So they said, well, what should we say instead? I said, tell them what to do when you're in a stress situation. Always tell the other person in simple language what to do instead of what not to do. So instead of police don't move, it becomes police stand still. It's amazing because as soon as you say that, the brain will follow, because you're getting very often when the critical faculty, the part of your mind that permits information or prevents information going into the unconscious, when it's offline, our brains respond like little kids. It'll work immediately. And so that's what we tell parents: tell your kids what to do when they're angry instead of what not to do. And hypnotists, tell your subjects what to do. So if somebody has insomnia and you have them in a trance, that's not the time to be saying, you won't stare at the ceiling all night anymore. You won't lie awake all night with it. No, you tell them, you will sleep through the night. Your sleep will be sweet. Your dreams will be lovely. Say what will happen instead of what won't or shouldn't happen. Then there's no intermediate deletion step.
That's really interesting.
And it's really key. It's very simple, and it makes a huge difference in communication. I mean, think about it. The guy who comes home from work an hour late, and his wife thinks he's been out drinking.
Okay.
So he comes in and she says, "You're out drinking, weren't you? You're late." No, I had a meeting with the boss. "You're lying again. You were out in the bar." "No, I wasn't. I was with the boss." "You're lying." "Well, he's right here with me. I brought him home for coffee." And he steps around the door, and she's still really mad. She says, "Well, I can't just stop being mad instantly." No, because a lot of this is chemically driven. We have chemicals created by our brains and our bodies that are stronger than anything we can get from a pharmaceutical source. So much of our behavior is mitigated by these chemical interactions. And so the guy comes home, and if he says, "Don't get mad," it's about the worst thing you can say, because immediately the person has to create a representation of what it means to get mad. And if they're under stress, they won't delete it. It'll just happen. So we tell people, instead of saying "don't get mad," you say "remain calm." Now, listen to the presupposition in that they're already calm. There was an Ontario Provincial Policewoman, female constable, north of Toronto. We have Highway 400, which is 4 lanes.
Wait, before you go forward, I don't like it if someone says calm down, though. I don't like that.
No, that's right. And you shouldn't. That was my sister, used to push my buttons when I was a kid. She's 7 years older than me. So when we were little kids, she's 14, I was 7. It's a big difference. Now that I'm 69 and she's 76, it's not that big a difference. But she used to push my buttons, get me all mad, and they go, "Shh, just calm." And it would, I freaked out.
Yeah.
So there's a different way of handling it. So this police constable was the first officer on the scene of a bad crash. The guy hit black ice. The 400 highway is very snowy and blizzardy. And he went off the road, hit a rock embankment. The passenger was killed. His friend was not wearing a seatbelt, obviously dead. He's got a broken leg. He's leaking blood from the femoral artery. This female cop is there first. She's called for an ambulance. She looks in, sees his legs bleeding, his bones at a crazy angle. And it's like, she puts her thumb in the femoral artery, stops the bleeding. He looks, sees his friend's dead, goes into shock. He gets a PGO spike in his brain, pons, geniculate body, occiput. His brain's going, wah! His critical faculty, his prefrontal cortex goes offline, and he sees his own leg and says, "I'm going to lose my leg. They're going to amputate. I'm going to lose my leg. I'm going to lose my leg." And she says to him, "Remain calm." And he goes, "Okay." She told us in a lecture I gave and said, "This works. I used this when he taught this last year." Remain calm implies the person is already calm.
Yeah.
And they're just saying to stay there. But if you say calm down, that's implying you're already angry and freaking out, right? Or upset. And he just calmed right down again. So there's all kinds of ways in through the language. And that's what power language is.
Wow. Okay. So then I was looking through another post of yours, and it talked about pain words.
Yeah, painted words. Yeah. When we have words that upset us, they can be racial slurs, they can be swear words, whatever they are. They get coded in the amygdala of the brain. The amygdala flashes. And when I would teach people to deal with trauma, what they're doing, whether it's a phobia or any other horrendous event that's occurred, when the person is triggered and it starts flashing in the amygdala, they feel like they're back in the event, even though it is a past event. It's a time distortion. It feels like the event's happening again, even though it isn't. So if there's an initial sensitizing event that gives somebody a phobia to snakes or whatever, When they see a snake, the brain responds, the amygdala flashes and goes nuts, to use the medical term, and they feel horrible. Well, that happens with words too. Words get coded in the amygdala. And when we say painted words, they're words that upset people. And we're best to avoid them, or we can work with somebody and remove the emotional charge of it. So if I'm dealing with someone who has chronic pain, or I don't deal with clients anymore, teach others to do it. One of my students would be told, you don't say words like pain. You don't use words like agony. These are words that are going to make it worse. Instead, we say that unpleasant feeling or that discomfort you felt. Now, notice I'm saying felt. I've already moved it into past tense instead of present tense. So we're working temporally around it. And we're even avoiding the words that will make it worse. We say words like pressure instead of pain, and it's much more effective.
And I also like how you use the past tense verb, because you're making this assumption that it's over. We've moved on.
It's crazy, isn't it? And the simple shifts in language can change everything. I was in Northern Ontario. I did a hypnosis show. This would be mid-90s. Moving out of this college, I had to walk down a very long hall. I'd just gotten paid. And this guy comes up to me as he's pacing beside me, and he said, can you get rid of headaches with hypnosis? I said, sure. You got one? He said, yeah. I said, what color is it? He said, it doesn't have a color. It's a headache. I said, if it did have a color, what color would it be? He looks, I watch as he's walking, his eyes go all over doing a transderivational search. He said, sort of a weird greeny brown. I said, okay, pull it out of your head. He said, I can't. I said, just pretend you can. Grab it with your hand, pull it out. Look at that greeny brown. What would be a nicer color? He says, pale blue. I said, change it to pale blue. Slam it back in your head. And I'm just reaching the door. And he goes, it's gone. It's gone. My headache's gone. I said, that's right. Just left a silver bullet and rode away into the sunlight. It didn't take longer than 20 seconds to get rid of it. So I said, yeah, where did it hurt? Where did you feel it? It's gone. It's not past tense. Implication, it's gone. But by changing it, moving it out of the kinesthetic, the feeling system, into the visual system, we're now able to change it and put it back in. If you can point to where you feel something, you can change it. Crazy stuff.
I could sit here and just have a long moment of silence just to process all of that. I'm going to move on because I know people, I'm sure others are going to hit pause. Like, I got to think about this for a little bit. Do you think that even works with migraines and those really terrible
migraines? We do differently. I've treated migraines on a number of occasions and use a method created by a Canadian hypnotist who's no longer with us. He was out of Montreal. His name was Ruben Picarve, great hypnotist. He came up with a method, and we put somebody in a trance when they're not having a migraine. That's the key.
Yes.
And we're talking single side of the head, classic migraine. And so when they're not having one, we trance them out. We have them imagine a concrete cylinder, maybe 3 feet high, with wires sticking out at the top, and they're all shorting out. And this is in trance. Then we say, imagine this amazing electrician, this perfect master electrician comes along with his tool belt, and he cuts off those wires and puts new ones in, and then he connects them all properly. And he runs an electrical connection, a very thin wire, to the little finger of your left hand. And now, instead of getting a migraine, that will discharge into your baby finger from now on. And you'll know you would have had a migraine, but instead you'll get this electrical discharge, and you'll be really happy that you didn't get a migraine. I've got students, one woman, Christina, this is probably 6 years ago, we ran it on her in class and videoed it. She was getting migraines often twice a week, and they'd last for a day or so. She said she'd be sitting there, the weather might change, or she'd eat the wrong thing. And she said her baby finger will start twitching like crazy. And she'll just smile and say, that would have been a migraine. And it's as though it's discharging all the potential for this migraine headache.
That's
crazy
incredible
stuff. I mean, it never stops amazing me. I've been doing hypnosis in related fields since 1965.
Yeah.
And it still fascinates me.
So how do you put someone in a trance? Would the average person want to use that power? Would the average person want to be putting people in trances? And do you even want to let people know how to do this?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's nothing secret about it. There's as many methods as there are people. You can use purely verbal methods. You can create cataleptic limbs floating in the air and use that to intensify the trance. Every time we drive a long distance.
Hold on a second. Did you just say cataleptic limbs to put
cataleptic? Cataleptic. So
like they're
for example,
so like they're catatonic?
Yeah.
Is that what
cataleptic
you mean?
limb. Yeah. Catalepsy's been understood as being connected with hypnosis for 200 years now. And it was the late, great Milton Erickson, psychiatrist, who said catalepsy, the related phenomena of time distortion and amnesia, happen with hypnosis all the time. And a cataleptic limb is just a limb where the agonist and the antagonist muscles are in perfect balance. So a limb will hover in the air, or you can have cataleptic eyelids that don't work, or cataleptic legs where you can't stand up. And they can either go so weak they don't work or be hovering. And it's an induction to so many of our students, once lockdown happened, were no longer able to see clients.
Yeah.
So we had to develop a number of methods for them to do hypnosis on Zoom.
I see.
And one of the methods I created was you tell a person to simply hold a pen in front of the screen. We'd have the person focus on this pen and close their eyes and focus on where they can feel their fingers touching it. Now with their eyes shut, they reach with their other hand and remove the pen and pretend they can still feel it. And then you start giving instructions for drifting into trance. Now, you never tell them their hand is going to stay there, but it just becomes cataleptic and stays there anyway. Once we have catalepsy, we have an inroad. But I found that a bit ponderous, so I came up with a better one. Have the person, their hand with their fingers touching together as lightly as possible. Okay. And we discuss how we play with magnets as a kid. And when you put the same two south poles or two north poles together, they repel each other. Right. And so imagine all your fingers are the same pole and stare at your hand. And when you notice your fingers are beginning to move apart, you can just let your eyes close. The person does, but the hand becomes cataleptic and stays there. And then we just segue into notice all the sensations in that hand and perhaps a tingling sensation, which also means perhaps no tingling sensation. It's every response is legitimate. And as your hand sinks down, it will do so only at the rate that you go into a very deep trance. And that's it. That's the induction.
Aren't some people more susceptible to that than others?
That's a good question. Typically, it's everybody's susceptible to hypnosis unless they have some sort of mental illness or are stoned out of their brain. It's just which method will work for them. Back in the 40s and 50s, they made the ridiculous mistake of drawing these conclusions on all these hypnosis scales, like 10% are great subjects, 40% are pretty good, 10% can never be hypnotized. Well, let's look at the research, how they did it. They played a 33 1/3 RPM record, which you would never know anything about because you're way too young. So they play all these records, they play a record and everybody listens to the same record. And then they say, oh, these people went into trance and these didn't. Hypnosis isn't listening to a record. No wonder they got such abysmal results. Hypnosis is a psychodynamic loop between you and the other person. And a good hypnotist learns to enter that loop and to continuously adjust their behavior until the other person goes into trance. So any human being can be hypnotized under the right circumstances. And what is the most ubiquitous trance inducer of all is the television, because you watch someone watch TV for a long time, keep looking at them, they'll sink further into the couch as they get more relaxed. Their blink reflex will slow. Their facial muscles will become flaccid. Their lower lip size will increase because the mandibular angle unhinges. And they will display all the requisite external trance indicators. And you can test it. You say their name and they won't even answer. And then you ask them again. Finally, you go, what? Like you're stopping them out of it. We go into trance all the time. It's just whether or not we notice that we are going into it.
So is that why it's called TV programming? Because they're programming our brain?
I've never thought of that. It's a great question. It's interesting, isn't it? It's everywhere. It really is everywhere. Hypnotic language patterns. My wife and I were in a bank line up downtown Toronto years ago. And there was a poster for the bank we were in. And it was to encourage people to borrow money. And the poster, Deedre, no exaggeration, these exact words, what it said, I took note of it. It said, borrow to get ahead so you don't fall behind. Now, isn't borrowing going further into debt? And isn't going further into debt falling further behind in anyone's estimation? I'm not surprised. It probably worked really well for them.
Yeah, anytime I see old ads, things like cigarettes and doctors recommend a whole pack a day because it's so healthy and that kind of thing. And you just
crazy, isn't it?
How can that be in an ad? That is so terrible. And then what messages are we getting now that are completely preposterous? Yeah.
Anything that has a huge list of side effects, I don't go anywhere near it anyway. But it's funny you said that about the old ads. My wife and I were watching some on YouTube, just laughing at stuff from the 60s and 70s. And there was a kid's toy, which has to be the most dangerous toy of all time. It was by Gilbert, the science company. They made chemistry sets and electrical sets, which my father bought me because he wanted me to be an electrical engineer like him, but it never happened. And it was like the young atomic scientist set or something, which should be a huge flashing in our amygdalas right away. Like, what is this? They actually gave you the kid with this. It was $50 then. It'd be like $400 now. Ooh. So they get an actual Geiger counter. And they get a fragment of uranium-238 with it.
What?
Yeah, they were giving this to kids. I think they had a money back guarantee. If you lost the uranium or swallowed it or whatever, they'd send you another piece.
If you swallowed it. Oh my goodness.
It's crazy stuff.
Growing up with an electrical engineering father, was he funny? Was he into puns, dad jokes, or no sense of humor at all? Just where do you get your sense of humor?
You've got to remember the foundation. I was born in England, so we're a family of Brits. So we have the DNA advantage. My parents were inadvertently hilarious. I used to say if fashion law was enforced, they would face a life sentence without hope of parole. My dad, he was funny as hell. He'd walk along a beach and there were all these monarch butterflies that had fallen asleep on the beach in the sun. And he very gently and carefully gathered them and filled his boater hat with them and walked along the beach, went up to a stranger and said, "Good afternoon," took the hat off and all these butterflies flew off. I mean, funny as hell. It was good. I mean, if I'd stayed home, Deedre, I'd be speaking like this now, because this is just how we spoke in our house. We're from the north of England, from Manchester. And if I had stayed in Manchester, I'd still be speaking like this. And the funny thing is, I was 4 years old when we come to Canada, and I'm still able to speak like this because I did it all. And then I go to school and be Canadian. So
I went to high school in England. I was there for 3 years.
How wonderful for you.
I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Okay, so I'm going back to these power words. There are a lot of people that recently have experienced layoffs, and they're out there trying to find a new job. What word or two or three or four would you suggest that they say in an interview? And are there certain words that perhaps they should put on their resume that work just as well?
Excellent. Okay, I'll give you a couple of tricks for that right away.
Okay.
I used to do a lot of keynote speeches. Be in Miami one day and Vancouver the next. It was a lot of fun, but it was exhausting. Sometimes buyers would not go through the agency Speaker Spotlight, which is the company that booked me all over the place. They were great. Sometimes people would contact me directly. And they say, "Well, we're wondering if you're going to be the speaker for us." I'd ask about their event. And the first thing I would do is I would not interpret. So I would get their exact words, their exact language. And those are the words I present back to them. So if they'd say, "We're looking for a riveting speaker who's going to have a really comedic delivery," I'd write these words down. And then 5 minutes later in the conversation, I'd say, "I think I can give you something you like. If you want a comedic delivery, or if you're looking for maybe a riveting speaker, I would probably be the one that would be right for you." And they go, "Oh, well, that sounds fantastic." Now they would forget that they've given me the very words that push their buttons. And years ago, Steelcase, the office furniture company, the Admiral Hotel in Toronto, I had a meeting with one of their VPs and his secretary. They wanted to see if they're going to book me. So I built rapport with them, matched and mirrored, did a lot of hypnotic language in the meeting and left. They booked me. And then I did the training for them. And the guy stood up afterwards. He said, "You did all this on me." I said, "That's right." He said, "I'd left the meeting, walked across the street in Toronto." And he turned to his secretary and said, "I don't know what it is, but I really want to book this guy." And she said, "So do I." It's very powerful. There was a company called Jumbo Video.
Well, hold on a second. They talk about when you create a resume that you shouldn't send off the same resume to everyone because you need to use their same keywords. Same thing, because the computer AI is going to look for the same words in the job description that they want to see on your resume. So it's sort of the same concept there.
Well, here's a really sneaky trick, because I never sent resumes or anything. It was just a conversation, right?
Sure.
So a sneaky trick is this. I only had one time, only once since 1975, this did not work, only once. And it was at George Brown College. And it's because the people who were thinking of hiring me, they were around a table, half of them had their back to me and weren't even paying attention. So I think that was the problem. But if I was on the phone, here's something people can use. Plug in your own words here, but here's the concept. You talk about what they want, what their needs are. And then I would say this. I'm not going to say, now realize you can say anything by not saying it. Okay. So I'd say, I'm not going to say that I'll be the best speaker you've ever had. I'm not going to say that. I want you to discover that for yourself. That would be the key. And if you say it congruently, it's amazing because you've not said it.
But you said it.
Yeah, but you're putting the ball back in their hands. Another thing, it goes back to...
hold on. That's almost like a mother-in-law saying, "I would never get in the middle of your relationship."
Yeah, I guess it is, isn't it? They say that line, what's the cognitive dissonance is when your new car is being driven off a cliff, but it's your mother-in-law doing it. So anyway, tell them what you're not saying is really powerful. A friend of mine was a plumber. He did plumbing, put in sprinkler systems and did emergency plumbing for a fast food chain in Toronto. He got the gig by phoning them and saying, I'll be available 24 hours a day. I'll do all your plumbing needs. He wasn't even a plumber. He just was good at the stuff. And they'd say, well, we already have a contract with company XYZ. And he'd go, oh. And they go, what? And he just said, I'm not going to say you'll have a big problem with them. I'm not going to say that at all. And he's putting in the doubt again by not saying something.
Now he's saying it. I'm not going to say this.
Right. So when you use their own language, in fact, when you use their own language is powerful. Their very words. This active listening thing, I think, is nonsensical, where you're supposed to rephrase what they say. No, use their words. If we have words that are nominalizations, that are nouns you cannot put in a wheelbarrow, nouns like empowerment, strength, happiness, love, they all mean a different thing to every human being on earth based on their own personal history, their own beliefs, their perceptual filters, whatever.
Right.
And so if someone says, I want more love in my life, I'm not going to say, well, it sounds to me like you need more people around you. That's my interpretation. So I'm going to say their very word, more love. I'll repeat it, nod wisely and sagely. Here's a classic case. When I was a therapist, I stopped in about 2000. We lost our office space. I was right on Lake Ontario, across from Starbucks, had a great spot. And we lost our space, so I just shredded all my stuff and bounced them up to colleagues of mine. A woman came in. This woman was in her early 40s. And I'm not going to say she was very, very hot. I wouldn't say that at all. But she was going to go to the French Riviera. She was recently divorced. And I said, what is it you want? She wanted the impetus to get even fitter and a little bit thinner. And I said, what is your intention behind that? And she said, I want to walk along that beach wearing a black thong and nothing else and see these guys in their 20s just drooling. So, right. When I do the hypnosis, I say, and you can see yourself walking along a beach in the Riviera wearing a thong and nothing else, and guys just drooling, and she's going into this powerful state. Now we've installed her words hypnotically. It was an interesting image, but yeah, use their own words. Don't interpret. Play their own words back. But another tricky one is using the word because in a very specific way. The word because is a remarkably powerful word when it's used properly. When you say something in front of the word because, that is a simple stand-alone command, and then follow because with any kind of rationale, doesn't matter what it is. The words in front of because of the sentence structure itself, tend to go past the critical faculty of the brain right into the unconscious. It's hypnotic. One woman I taught this to is one of the top real estate agents in Eastern Canada. And she stood up at one of the meetings, explained how she'd applied this. She said, I got a huge house, I'm divorced, I have a teenage son. She said he would not clean his room ever. She said, I threatened him. I offered to reward him. Nothing. He just never cleaned it. She said there were half-eaten sandwiches under the bed from months before. Stinky socks. She said it was a disaster. And she said, it was a big room. It drove me nuts. She said, I learned what you taught me last year. She went home, walked into her son's room. He's listening to music. What? Takes his headphones off. And she said, Scott, clean up your room because we're going out tomorrow. She said he looked confused and went, what did you say, Mom? So she repeated it. She said, I said, clean up your room because we're going out tomorrow. She said she watched, his eyes went all around, processing, and went, okay, Mom, started cleaning. She went out, staggered out of the room in the hall, leaned against the wall, and went, yes, how can it be that simple? And she said, in 2 hours, he was done. And or 80 minutes or whatever she said. And she said, was it clean like a mother would have cleaned it? Not a chance. But he took like 4 bags of garbage and junk out of his room. And he never made the connection. There was no connection between clean up your room and we're going out tomorrow. So when you want to influence someone, use simple, direct, short commands in front of because, and then offer a reason that is largely irrelevant. People were using this to get photocopies made and butt in the line, let me in line because, and they could say anything. Oh, okay. They were actually saying, let me in line because I have to make some photocopies. Well, so did everybody else. They go, oh, okay.
Mike, why is this? I remember growing up, I would ask my parents a lot of questions, and then eventually they would just become exasperated and say, because, and there was nothing else after
That's
that.
right.
I mean, is that why? Is that sort of implanted in us? Like, why? Why does that work?
The reason it works, and this is my theory, we have a video on this, the critical faculty is not part of the physical structure of the brain, it's a construct, but it's the part of our mind that permits or prevents information going into the unconscious and affecting our behavior. When we put someone in hypnosis, the critical faculty goes offline and information goes directly into the unconscious. The best metaphor for this I've ever seen was, if you think of it as a doorman in a nightclub, his job is to determine who gets in the nightclub and who doesn't.
Yes.
So you can make friends with him, you can distract him, you can sneak past him. That's how the critical faculty works. When we use one of these because statements or because sentences, provided everything in front of it is a command, not a request, not a question, not will you let me in line, but let me in line. Not I was wondering if I could get it. No, let me in line because it goes past the critical faculty right into the unconscious, and it structures. That makes it work like it's hypnotic.
But you don't say please. It's a command.
That's a request. A simple command that you could put an exclamation point after it. That's how you can tell. And when it doesn't work, it's because people are turning it into a request or a question.
Wow, that is really interesting.
Use this a lot, Deedre, because it works.
Oh, you better believe I will. Okay. So next up, I was thinking about the woman with the thong. All right. And
yeah, so was I a lot.
It made me think about people who perhaps want to lose weight, and hypnosis is good for that. I remember reading years ago, they did a test with Weight Watchers and Atkins diet and a couple of others, and hypnosis won. It was the best form for keeping the weight off.
It is. It's really good. There's a lot of ways of approaching it. The way I would teach my students in the past, it was 4 weeks, a 4-week intervention. So they'd come in once a week for 4 weeks. We would find out all their outcomes, what they specifically want, and what their intention is, just like the woman on the beach, because we want to be able to play back their intention, which will be the most motivating thing for them. Then we put the person in hypnosis, and we're going to deal with 4 different things on the 4 weeks. So one is beliefs. We're going to change their beliefs as to what's possible. If people think, oh, everybody in my family just gains weight and dies of heart attacks, that is not a useful belief. So we're going to undermine that. There will be metabolic rate, which can even affect the thyroid through hypnosis, which is going to be rate. We're not going to say you're producing more T3 hormone, but we're going to say your metabolism will run like a furnace, burning fuel effortlessly. So we're not going to crank it too high. We'll also work with food cravings, what kind of foods they crave and what kind we want them to crave. And self-esteem issues, which there will always be a self-esteem aspect to this. So we will look at the 4 aspects, determine which we think from the interview will be the most important one for that person. We would get that from the intake. So if they're saying, well, I just believe it's going to be a real hard go for me, we say, okay, belief seems to be the most important. So in the first session, we'll bang, undermine the beliefs, teach them how to build in new beliefs and so on, which is beyond the scope of what we're doing here today, but that sort of thing. And then give them instructions and come back the next week. Then the second week, we would do another one, but we'd reinforce beliefs again. And the third week, we do another one, reinforce the first 2 weeks. And we're prioritizing using something called, primacy. The suggestion you give at the beginning will be the most powerful. And then after 4 weeks, we turn them loose. So that's one way of doing it. There are multiple ways we can change food cravings. My friend Deedre Daniel in Toronto is an expert at dealing with weight management, and she can make people actually hate foods that they shouldn't be eating. I mean, despise them, be sickened by them so they don't eat them ever again. Now that's a bit strong. And I can't imagine myself saying, never eat pizza again. That would that would just be no kind of life worth having.
Exactly.
And then you reinforce it and you build in momentum. So every week it's building in momentum. You're celebrating small victories and just keep the person moving. And over time, the weight just fades away.
It just seems like a fantastic formula for any kind of goal that people want to achieve. Because a lot of times it's those limiting beliefs, right?
Internal monologue. What is the story you're telling yourself? That's absolutely true. Yeah. Sometimes it's not useful. I mean, and all these things are models. To think that there is such a thing as the unconscious is ludicrous. It's a useful model. And the test of any model is whether or not it's useful. It works. That's great.
Mike, you've led a really fascinating life, and I could talk about hypnosis all day, but I want to talk about some of these other things. So,
yeah, sure.
Well,
I'm here for you.
So I went to a wine tasting many years ago, And the person who owned the establishment, they popped open a cork and they're swirling it around in their glass.
Yeah.
And he said, "Can you detect the hint of the skin of a Black Asian pear?" And I wanted to have a snappy response and I just couldn't. And all I said was no. And I've always thought this is the perfect example of annoying wine commentary. And so then I saw that you write this blog and you're very comedic in your approach. And I was just wondering how that even began and how did you find, I mean, how do you find humor in Willamette Valley Pinot Noir? Like how did that? Right.
Good question.
How did that happen?
Well, I haven't done the wine blog for at least 10 years now. I started in 2005. And I knew nothing about wine, not at all. And I got this idea. The best way to learn something. Now, you can't do this with brain surgery or flying an airliner, but the best way to learn a topic is instead of working your way up, you want to be a restaurateur, don't start as the dish pig and then find, and then you're this and this and a busboy and finally, no, you jump in at the very top and pretend you belong there. And act as if, now this is the as if brain from NLP. How would you talk? How would you behave? How would you move? How would you think if you were a wine expert? So you have to put some information. So that's what I did. I bought Wine for Dummies and I got a highlighter and I went through, I had no knowledge of anything. Went through and started highlighting and learned. Then I got a 1,000-page wine encyclopedia. I still haven't been drinking any wine. I went through and learned the terminology and started writing this blog, and I needed a catchy name. So I wanted to be a gonzo wine journalist and be like Hunter S. Thompson, jump into events, write myself into these stories. And so I found a rap name generator online and I put in Mike Mandel and it came out Deacon Dr. Mandel Fresh. And I went, oh, it's fantastic. So I shortened it to Deacon Dr. Fresh. And people started writing to me. They didn't know if I was black or white or nobody knew anything about me. But I started pontificating about things and saying, if you can't get out of a triangle choke, what are you doing writing about Cab Sauv? And challenging people, putting martial arts and wine together and rock music and wine together. And which song is this? This is Hotel California. And here's why. And people started to buy into it. And then cases of wine started arriving and asking me to evaluate them. I started getting invited to wine events. And then Niagara, of course, has the best ice wine in the world. And they started asking me to be a wine judge. And I started joining all these real experts and pontificating on wine. But the stuff you're talking about, this, I detect a hint of canned green bean. The deacon was so opposed to that. We call that deconstructionism. And my mentor was a wonderful Irishman by the name of Billy Munnelly, who now lives in Portugal. And he taught me how to judge a wine by the feeling it creates. And if you're matching it to the feeling, 6 different ways. And that's it. If it's a warm evening by the fire, I want a big in-your-face red, like a huge Zin from California or a Malbec or something that's going to fit with that mood. I don't want that with early in the evening. It's going to put me to sleep. I want something electric early in the evening, like a Marlboro Sauvignon Blanc or a Riesling or something. It's going to wake me up and energize me. I took my learning from Billy and then started to write from that perspective. And it took off.
That.
And then,
I love it. But one thing I'm not sure of, Mike, is why you decided you were going to be a wine expert. So you weren't you're like, I'm going to be a wine expert just because it was just,
done it.
It was like,
it just sounded like a fun thing to do. And then I hosted the Ontario Wine Awards in character. I hosted the Wine Awards as the deacon. I wore a kilt, had all my AC/DC tattoos, and carried a cane. They've never recovered from it. They have never recovered from that.
Are these tattoos, were they permanent tattoos?
Oh, yeah, they're all permanent, yeah.
So you have a bunch of AC/DC tattoos?
I've got one AC/DC, yeah. I've got 11 tattoos. They're mostly, the only one you can see is the faux Hindi. That was my Bengal cat, Raja. Who I lost a few years ago. He's the only cat whose name I have. Yeah, he was wonderful. But yeah, so I had the cutoff shirt, so AC/DC and the barbed wire and my Jimmy Page Led Zeppelin one and my Calico Jack pirate flag on the back and the anarchy symbol, my misspent youth one on the chest.
I love
if it's not fun, it's not worth doing, right? It's not
Yes,
fun.
yes.
It's worth
But
doing.
Mike, you've really opened up my world because so many people have said to me they want to be a wine expert of some sort and they want to go to schools and all this kind of stuff and internships. And just to take your hacked method here,
Yeah,
just
the as if
suddenly,
frame. Jump in at the top.
I
Jump
love
in
it.
at the top. I mean, I got to taste some insane Bordeaux's, but then it moved to Scotch. This one was crazy. I'd never tasted Scotch in my life since high school. Some black and white that was horrible. I don't think you can get it anymore. I got invited by this guy, John Maxwell, in Toronto. He's a New York style restaurant called Allen's, and it's just a beautiful restaurant. He had a Scotch tasting. It was me, John, Roberto Martello from Grano's restaurant, and a wine writer. I can't remember the guy's name. The four of us. And he invited Ian Miller, who was the distiller and global rep from Glenfiddich Scotch in Scotland. So the five of us had lunch. We had 10 kinds of Scotch. They opened a $1974,000 a bottle. We're drinking that. Then he brought out a 1929. And Ian Miller's going, oh, right, label, right, yep, fabulous. We opened this. And he said to me, you realize, Mike, you've had your first drive in a car and it's a Lamborghini Countach. It'll never be the same after this. I could barely get my head out the door. I was invited because I was the deacon.
Right, because like, let's back up again to the beginning of that journey. You decide, I'm going to be a wine expert. I'm going to read Wine for Dummies. I'm going to go through a encyclopedia. Then I'm going to write a blog using a rap name generator to come up with my name. You haven't posted your picture online anywhere. Cases of wine show up, and then you're in this amazing room drinking. How much was one shot of that whiskey?
Well, the 1974, they said it was $1,000 a bottle. At the 1929, that would have been, I have no idea what that was worth. It was bought at an auction.
That's incredible.
So when people
I love
talk to
that.
me about Scotch, they say, "Oh no, I don't know anything about your Scotch experience, but I can beat it." I mean, I drink with the distiller of Glenfiddich, but it's fantastic. And when I say, if it's not fun, it's not worth doing. I'm not kidding. Like it really, life is pretty short. I think
it is.
My mom died at 53 of cancer.
Sorry.
My dad died at 57. His first sign of heart disease was a fatal heart attack.
Oh.
And I'm coming up to 70. And I'm on borrowed time. I'm past the shelf life. So I stay fit and still teach martial arts and stuff and eat well for the most part. And I'm wringing all the fun out of life that I possibly can.
Well, it's hard not to think that you're in when you see your parents die at a certain age, but you're so full of life. I just can't imagine you going anytime soon. I feel like you got another multiple decades ahead of you.
That's the plan. That's the plan.
You're the master instructor at a Toronto martial arts school.
Adam Sutherland is the chief instructor at the Toronto School of British Jiu-Jitsu. I'm the system head. I'm the guy who trained the chief instructor. Okay, so I'm the head of the whole system.
When I was reading up about you, it said there was a British Army form of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, here's my British jiu-jitsu tattoo in Japanese.
All right.
And here's my only Arabic. It is Haria, which means freedom. It's just such a great word. So British jiu-jitsu comes from two streams. Bill Underwood, who was my direct sensei, my teacher. He was on the Tonight Show multiple times. He was only 5'2", and he shrank to 5 feet tall as he got older. He died at 90 in a north of Toronto nursing home. And when Bill died, I was the last instructor trainer in the world. And the other stream comes from William Fairbairn, who was a British policeman who was sent to Shanghai in, I believe, the 1920s, because Shanghai was so dangerous that when police got murdered, it didn't make the papers anymore. And so he came in, was sent by Britain to bring law and order. And he studied with the Empress of China's Kung Fu master. And he was the first white man to get a black belt in judo at the Kodokan in Japan. And he got in a street fight and he had the crap kicked out of him and went, I think I really must rethink all this. And Fairbairn created a system of hand-to-hand combat. And we joke, but it's true. We say, if James Bond was real, this is the method he would use. So it's used by British soldiers. It's very simple. It's very nasty because we don't wear pajamas. We wear steel-toed boots and we carry edged weapons, and because it's the real world, right?
Oh, yeah.
So if someone grabs us around the arms from behind, we won't try to slip out of it. The knife comes out and we cut the tendons behind his knee and we're out.
Much more practical. Yeah.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. I know people that are in martial arts hate being asked if they've been in a street fight, but I got to ask you, have you ever been in a street fight?
I've had a couple encounters since I've learned. Yeah, it's very, very simple. It's over so quickly. It's disappointing. Bill Underwood, my master, said, if you can't end it in 2 seconds, you're doing something wrong. You should never get in a fight. You should just shut it down. I was a police trainer as well, and I taught 50 Ontario Provincial Police hand-to-hand combat instructors. Mm-hmm. And this was right after Fight Club with Brad Pitt had come out. Was it Brad Pitt?
I love that movie. Yes.
Was it Brad Pitt? Yeah.
Yes, it's Brad Pitt.
And so we got 50 cops around the circle. So I got to teach. Not one guy in the room had seen this film. And I thought it was being hilarious. I said, rule number 1, you do not talk about Fight Club. And they're all looking at me with blank expressions. I thought, shoot, nobody knew it. But so
the episode before this is with a chef who has a restaurant called Fight Club. And I asked him if it was based on the movie, and it turns out it wasn't. It has to do with the punch bowls that they were serving and the club sandwiches. Oh, like,
fantastic.
No.
Club sandwich. You gotta love it. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that most of the stuff with hand-to-hand stuff, I've only been there a couple of things. They're over really quick. But it's most of the things are people make mistakes. The street fighter and the criminal's advantage is they attack first. And the average person doesn't realize it's on. They don't calibrate people. They make stupid mistakes. Like we teach women, if you're in an underground parking lot, first of all, you shouldn't be there alone anyway.
Yep.
If you are, walk down the middle. Don't walk near the cars. So you've got reactionary time. When you don't get out of your car without checking this around. And if a woman is attacked in a parking lot, the safest thing to do, roll underneath the car and hang onto the undercarriage and scream for your life. They can't get you out. It's just extremely practical. But people panic. There was a woman in Toronto who was walking by a big forest in the West End, part of a park, and she noticed there was a guy following her. And she panicked and ran into the woods to try to get away. I mean, under stress. My own wife was in a cab in Toronto going up Yonge Street, which is the longest street in the world. It runs right to Hudson's Bay from Lake Ontario. And the cab driver, someone walked in front of the car and he said, maybe I should run her over. She's rich. I hate rich people. I should kill her. My wife said, well, that's not very nice. He said, you look rich to me. Maybe I should kill you. Oh. Now, she was so freaked out. She forgot she's got a cell phone in her purse. The cab number. She's on a stop and go street. She could just get out, walk away from the cab.
Right.
But instead, she just froze. The freeze reflex cut in, fight, flight, or freeze. And later we talked it out and I told her what she could have done. And it's one of the things for all your listeners, just a public service. In British Jiu-Jitsu, we call it the witching hour. If you can get to where you are going by 11 p.m., your chance of being in a violent encounter is almost non-existent. After 11 p.m., it starts climbing, chance of violence, and it peaks around 2:30 a.m. and then starts to fade again. So that if you get in a violent encounter in some way, you're probably screwed up.
Wow. Are there any words that could diffuse a fight?
Well, you have to counterattack immediately. But the thing is, we say set up reactionary gap. So with guys, they start the monkey dance, the chest, you want to go, you want to, testosterone. And the key is you don't play the monkey dance. You push the guy back and you say, give me 10 feet, back off. If you can increase your distance by about 20 feet to the person, the chance of them following you is remote. But we push them back. Now, if they come up again, you don't wait, you attack the person. They were already attacking you. You have to end it quickly. You have to strike first.
I see.
And it's and that's my dream. I say to my wife, I don't ever want to get in a conflict again, but it's just so freaking amazing to know that if some idiot attacks this poor old 70-year-old guy, great to be his worst nightmare.
I also read that you were immortalized in a Gatto song.
Oh yeah, Gatto was a Canadian band. They did some pretty good stuff. They did a song called Pretty Bad Boys. And there's a line in that. I was doing a lot of mentalism then. And when I met Greg, the bass player and the singer, whose band it was, Greg Godovitz, I did a mentalism effect on him and he never forgot it. I wound up opening for the band a few times. So when they wrote Pretty Bad Boys, they have the line, I ain't no Mike Mandel, but I can read your mind. And that was kind of cool to be in a song, even if they were not really that well-known a band.
I was listening to the song before you logged on because I was trying to figure out.
You heard it? Oh my goodness!
Yeah, I found it on Spotify.
I think the line in front of it's a bit unfortunate. It's something, come back to my place, we'll have a real fine time with whips and chains and lubricants and things that bind. I ain't no Mike Mandel, but I can read your mind. And I've consistently distanced myself from the first part of that verse.
20 feet.
20 feet. Give me 20 feet. Back off. Yeah.
You've led a really full life, traveling the world, speaking on stages. And I wonder if you planned that or if you just found ways to continue to bring those opportunities for yourself. Did you have a plan?
Wow. No, I never had a plan. I'm a huge picture guy. My wife is really, really detailed and she's amazingly skilled. Like our house is decked out for a full-scale invasion of Syria, as she said. I was on stage in England in 1999. I got hit in the nose with a steel chair in the midst of a hypnosis show by accident, got a broken nose and got the flu on top of it. And it was itching inside my ear. And I was back at my bed and breakfast, broken nose and pain and all this, and the flu coming on. And I just wish I could scratch my ear. And I opened the case my wife had packed in this 3 little Q-tips with a rubber band around it. Got in the ear. And I just need some painkiller. And she put a tube of these things that used to be over the counter in Canada called 222s. They were aspirin with codeine. It's like, thank you, God, taking these. But she is so organized and I'm the opposite. So with me, it's big picture. If I have an interest, I'll pursue it. And then if it really bites, I'll keep going. Like I was a runner for years. I used to run 6 miles 4 times a week, but I learned it's true that if you keep running after 40, it's stupid. If you keep running after 50, you're insane. And so I had to find different interests. And I played chess since I was 5, never reached chess mastery. I'm too big picture guy. I just couldn't stop making stupid mistakes. And then I found my game, backgammon. Backgammon is a big picture game. I size up the pattern and my buddy got me into it. And I thought I'm going to get better at it than he is. And I took lessons with Mark Olsen in Denmark, who's a grandmaster of backgammon. He's one of the highest ranked players. He was number 6 in the world or something at one point. And I used to annoy my friend I used to say I was the best backgammon player in the world, but it pissed him off so much. I said, I'm not going to say it anymore. He said, oh, good. I said, I'm not the best backgammon player in the world. He said, good. I said, I think I might be the greatest backgammon player who's ever lived. He said, shut up. But that was just an interest. And you find interests and then pursue them, right? Some go nowhere.
And you decided I'm going to do hypnosis after seeing someone do it on stage.
No, it was summer of 65.
Okay.
I was 12 years old. I lived in Toronto next to an animal hospital, McLean's Animal Hospital on Victoria Park Avenue. 2 kids lived above the animal hospital. Their father was a vet tech there. They had an apartment there. Someone had to be there all the time for the animals. And Max and Wayne Gibbs. So I was 12. I think Wayne was 10 and Max was 9.
Okay.
And my father and I went to a bookstore. He thought I was watching too much television because in England, we only had 2 channels at that time. We come to Canada, all these different great channels in Buffalo, New York. And my dad said, look, lad, I want you to read more books. I said, well, get me some, Dad. And he took me to a Coles bookstore in Toronto. And he said, any book you want, you can have. First one I saw, Key to Hypnotism, Walter B. Gibson, was like $2. He bought it for me and I learned everything in it. Went out searching for someone to hypnotize them. Max and Wayne were next door. So I went up over there and attempted to hypnotize them both. Max thought it was a big joke. He was 9 years old. He kept laughing. Wayne was a phenomenal hypnotic subject and his hand became cataleptic. I put a hat pin through the flesh of his finger, like right through the flesh. And it was bleeding and he was just sitting there looking at it with absolutely no pain, no discomfort. And I was ordered to cease and desist by his mother.
I bet, yeah.
But the bug had bitten. And the interesting thing is on my Facebook page, there's a picture of me and Wayne Gibbs. I ran into him when he was in his 50s doing a theater show out in east of Toronto. And he said, what do you do these days? He said, I haven't seen you in 40 years or whatever. He said, I remember you used to hypnotize me, stick pins through my fingers. I said, fun, you should ask. I said, you were actually patient 0. I said, I'm a hypnotist now. But yeah, that's what got me into it. And then it was a hobby, just messing around with it for years. And then January 1975, I quit my office job at Bell Canada and started doing this stuff full time.
Well, I think it's just incredible. It's time for the Pet Peeve segment. Everyone has those little things that annoy them, but we rarely mention them when we get to know someone. What are your pet peeves?
Oh, God. Get me started on that. I'll probably never stop.
Let's hear them.
The one crime I can actually understand is road rage. The number of morons. If someone sits 3 feet behind my car at highway speeds, I just want to drag them out of the car and neck crank them or something. Because if you want to endanger your own life, that's great. But if you want to endanger mine as well, I can't stand that. But the other one.
I always wish there was some sort of jousting pole where you can sort of push them away a little bit.
That'd be nice.
Just to give you some distance, right?
The or a taser or something you could get through the window. Yeah.
Just push them back. Give me
People
some
just
room.
driving really fast, and changing lanes really fast and endangering other people. I can't stand that. Another thing I can't stand is when someone has an infant in a stroller and the kid is, I don't even have kids, but the kid is trying to get the mother's attention and the mother's just staring at a screen. And missing that with the child, the mirror neurons between the mother and the child. It's so important to have that kind of contact. But the number one, I'll even move my hand and make it fine. But the worst one of all, the worst one to me is that freaking horrible Mariah Carey Christmas song.
Oh.
I'll tell you, all I want for Christmas is I want her to stop singing that song. I've gotten so good. I can turn it off like in about 1,000th of a second. As soon as I hear that, it's gone.
So you can name that tune in one note. Is that what you're saying?
I can name it in one. Yeah.
What were you afraid of as a child? And what are you afraid of now?
There's a good story behind that. It's an interesting question. For me, I had a very rare phobia when I was a kid. It's called altocellulophobia. It was so rare. At the time, it didn't even have a name. And it was the absolute terror of being in a room with a very high ceiling. It's the opposite of a fear of heights. It would be a fear of loats, I guess. But if I was in a hall with a room with a vaulted high ceiling, like in a museum, Toronto, Royal Ontario Museum was a nightmare for me. If I was holding my parents' hand, I'd be all right with sweaty hand and feeling I was going to faint. And if I got out of that, I'd feel okay. But I went to a public school, Earl Beatty Public School, that had very high ceilings. I'd feel like I was upside down, going to fall upward. So volleyball was a nightmare in the gym. Basketball was a nightmare. It would just create terror. And I had a teacher who was a real bastard. And our classroom, room 1, provided the monitor for the bell. Now, there was a bell, one of those discs on the wall with a stirrup handle that you ding would pull. And at a certain signal, someone from our class had to pull that and would ring on the other floors. This teacher could somehow tell that it frightened me because I'm looking up. And so he made me the bell monitor. Like he was a sadist. He was a nut bar. The stirrup was so high up for me, a very little boy. I had to jump with sweaty hands and try to grab this. Terrifying. Every day I go through this. Eventually, my parents figured I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. They didn't know what it was. They had me yanked out of his class, put in a good class, good teacher. Now, that phobia I had for years. My wife and I were in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, under the Whispering Gallery, under the dome.
Yeah.
She walked away from me, forgot, let go of my hand. I was paralyzed. I could not move and felt like I was going to faint. So she dragged me outside. I was hyperventilating. I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. I know it's irrational. So one day, maybe 12 years ago, that recent, I put myself in a trance and I went back, asked my unconscious to show me the first time this happened. Find the initial sensitizing event. We follow the feelings back, the affect bridge back. When we see the initial sensitizing event through the eyes of an adult, it becomes rational and it then disappears because the amygdala is firing, the information stuck there. We came to Canada in 1957 when I was 4. So I couldn't be any older than 4. And most phobias happen around that age, between 0 to 7. And I saw myself, a little boy with a bow tie on and shorts. And I was standing in a church in England, a small church. And it was all stone and dark. And there was an Anglican priest there with a cassock on. And he was standing by the baptismal font. And my mom was holding a baby girl in a christening dress. And there was water on the floor that had been splashed there. And this little girl was screaming her head off and it was echoing in this vaulted ceiling. And I saw myself just looking terrified. And I went, wow. And I said to my unconscious, is that the first or is there an earlier one? Went back earlier. In England still, long grass on a very small hill, maybe 3 feet, and a pond at the bottom. And I was walking down this hill to see if there were any fish in this pond. I slipped on the wet grass, thought I was going to go fall in the pond and drown. I was hanging onto the wet grass. I was screaming. Now, here are the common elements. The shiny pond, the shiny water on the floor, wet grass, wet floor, screaming sound. And as soon as I saw that through the eyes of an adult, the phobia imploded and disappeared. And my wife and I were in Paris in Notre Dame Cathedral. And I said, look, and I walked hands up, nothing, absolutely nothing, completely erased. It had become rational. We now know the electromagnetic disturbance in my right brain had gone amygdala, hippocampus, parahippocampal gyrus through Broca's area to the prefrontal cortex. It is now rationalized and makes sense. Bang, gone. Here's the sad thing, Deidre. I posted in the altocellulophobia. There's a help group online. And I posted in that and said, I used to have it. I got rid of it. Here's the process. Here's how you can get someone to, you don't know know anything. This is a lie. You're just trying to sell us products. I read about this guy. He's a hypnotist. He's just trying. And I just enjoy your phobia.
Mhm.
So
Some
that was the
people-
worst fear.
And what are you afraid of now?
Maybe not being able to read all the books I want to read in the time I have left.
That's come up a couple of times now, the time that you have
Yeah.
left. Time is finite though. And I think a
Yeah,
lot
it
of
is.
people don't think about that enough.
It's true. And no matter how we eat, no matter how we exercise and what
Mhm.
supplements we take, no matter what our DNA is, the death rate is still one per person.
Right. I read an article about some Buddhist monks that would meditate looking at corpses just to
Wow.
remind themselves and to also sort of desensitize themselves in a way.
That's
But-
wild.
Yeah. I'll see if I can find that article. I'll send it to you. Rounding this out on a positive note, what are you looking forward to in the future?
Well, the fact that we're able to do live trainings again after lockdown is fantastic. We had to take 3 years off. We just had our first architecture of hypnosis training in Toronto, a 5-day course, first time in 3 years, just a couple of weeks ago. So I'm looking forward to the next one in May, going back to Las Vegas for HypnoThoughts Live, world's biggest hypnosis conference, and then going back to Britain for the UK Hypnosis Convention in the fall of next year. I love going to those and hanging around with my peers and friends in the industry. And the funny thing is, I have no desire to travel. I just wrote a post the other day. I said, I really don't have a bucket list. I traveled so much from 1975 to about 4 years ago when I retired from stage, almost 5 years ago now, and then retired from doing keynotes. And I traveled so much. I had so many flights and so much driving. If I never see an airport again, that's just fine with me. We have a small cabin up north. It's 600 square feet, right on a pristine spring-fed lake with moose and bears and wolves, and 2.5 hours north of Toronto. And that's what I look forward to, spending 12 weeks there every year and just hanging out,
That's nice.
just chilling.
Yeah. I traveled a lot for work and it's lost its luster in a lot of ways.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I miss
Indeed.
Florida, though. I haven't been in a few years. I used to love going to Florida.
Well, come down and visit me. Come on down anytime. And now it's time for the very interesting game show. This isn't trivia. Throw accuracy out the window and give me your most ridiculous and creative answers instead. And let's see if you can come up with the most interesting answer. Are you ready? What would be exceptionally odd to find hidden inside a Christmas pudding?
Human head.
A human head.
Yeah.
It'd be very tasty. It's kind of Shakespearean, right? Wasn't there like
Very
a
much
head
so.
in one of the, yes. Okay. Next up, the Benedictine monk Dom Perignon spent a lot of time trying to remove bubbles from champagne. What did he have against bubbles?
Probably produced fragrance of some kind.
A fragrance of some kind? Okay.
Yeah,
right.
emitted through the human body.
And this is a brand new question that I just wrote, and you're a very distinguished gentleman, so it might be a little too raunchy. So we can skip past it if you like, but I'm going to go ahead and attempt it. You ready?
Right. Sure.
Okay. It was recently discovered that picking one's nose could lead to Alzheimer's. What could picking a wedgie lead to?
Bum timers.
What is bum timers?
It's when you hollow out your insides by accident and by increment, leaving a cavern so massive that someone with altocellulophobia would be triggered.
That's fantastic. All right. And for the last question of the day, which is asked at the end of every episode, what should have been invented by now?
Oh my goodness, what should have been invented by now?
Okay.
Crossbow, where if you don't like a specific Christmas song, you can fire it from the safety and privacy of your own home, and it can seek out the individual who sang it and pierce them in the heart.
So you want to kill Mariah Carey with her
Not
crossbow?
necessarily. Just want to kill the song. Nothing against her personally. Yeah.
I've got to get some clarification there. People writing
Yeah,
into
that's
me.
right.
I love that song. How could you kill her? Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Mike. How can folks get in touch with you?
Mike Mandel, hypnosis.com. And Mandel has one L, Mandel. Or listen to my Brain Software podcast. We're up to 216 episodes.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
And
lot
it's
of
still
content.
ridiculous. It's not as good as yours.
Oh, that's nice of you to say.
You have far more interesting guests than I do.
Great. Now, do you have any last words of advice to the listeners?
The bottom line with me is what I said earlier. I was only half kidding when I said if it isn't fun, it isn't worth doing. We can find that humor in all kinds of situations that make even the worst situations much easier to bear. I think we need to be looking for that. And humor unlocks the model, as Dr. John Grinder said. When we get people laughing about their problems, they really don't seem that bad and they become much more resourceful.
I agree. I'm always trying to find the humor in the situation. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. You're a lovely host.
Thank you. Well, bye, everyone. Until next time, be interesting.
Really are an awesome interviewer. As you can imagine, since 1975, I've done a hell of a lot of interviews, a lot of radio and television, and some people are just abysmal. They're just, so what kind of car do you like to drive if you're going to go and do a hypnosis show? What?
Why
what's
would
the
they ask
hypnotist
that?
even? Because they're idiots. There's nothing to figure out. They're just lunatics. But you know how to keep it going. The diversity of your questions is phenomenal. And I'm so glad you persisted and got me on your podcast.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, I don't
I'm
like
so
hearing
glad.
no.
Good for you.
So,
Wonderful. Friends for life, my dear. Friends for life.
Good. I think you're just absolutely fantastic.